Уважаемые коллеги, добрый день.
Dear colleagues, hello everyone. We're ready to begin. My name is Mikhail Rykhtik, and I am the director of the Institute for International Relations and World History at Lobachevsky University in Nizhny Novgorod. I am delighted to be a co-moderator of this workshop. It used to be a panel, but now it's a real workshop on the EU and the European security architecture. It is supported by the Nizhny Novgorod University, by the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and the Association of European Studies. We are delighted to welcome everyone sitting here in Nizhny Novgorod, and we are speaking to all of you while preparing to mark the 800th University of Nizhny Novgorod. We'll be happy to see everyone who wants to visit our university in Nizhny Novgorod, as well as the city during the celebrations. Now I'd love to give the floor to the director of the Institute of Europe, Russian Academy of Sciences, president of the FES-Russia, Alexey Gromyko. Please, you have the floor. Mikhail Ivanovich, thank you so much, and I welcome our colleagues from the sunny Moscow. Here, there is no difference between Nizhny Novgorod and Moscow as regards the summer temperature. However, the pandemic prevented us to be present in person during the workshop. Fortunately, we have modern media and we can talk to each other via Zoom. Let me welcome all the participants to the conference on behalf of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Association of European Studies. We are extremely happy that this project was made possible thanks to our partnership with Nizhny Novgorod University of Lobachevsky, as well as the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. We've been in partnership with them for many years, and I can't recall even a single year when we didn't hold joint events. We value our cooperation greatly, and it is of great asset to us that such big organizations manage to attract attention of all the participants and bring about this meeting. Today, we are going to speak about the EU-27 and European security architecture. It seems a very pressing issue, especially in light of the summits held in June, just recently. I believe that all the participants could see what are the main issues we're going to discuss today. There are three of them. First is the impact of Brexit on European security architecture. Here, there are a lot of issues to discuss because Great Britain, regardless of Brexit, is still the permanent member of the UN Security Council and the official nuclear five. So a lot will depend on this country as regards the negotiations for strategic stability held between Russia and the United States. What form will this kind of cooperation take? And how the European organization will join into this cooperation. Great Britain has issued its report and review on security and defense. There we can find a lot of interesting things and some controversies. We also should think about Great Britain when we speak about its contribution to European security. And of course, the incident with Defender that crossed the territorial waters of Crimea, and that looked rather menacing. So there are some issues to discuss. Russia and Great Britain, I think this April, have signed an additional protocol on preventing incidents in open sea and the airspace above it. Therefore, this we can see that there is a silver lining as regards European security. The second issue is the strategic EU autonomy, stagnation or development. This morning, I have held I've participated at a seminar held by the European Center, and we can find a lot of specialists writing about it. I think I'm also going to refer to the EU Summit that was held with the participation of Joe Biden and the European Council conference where they discussed relations with Russia and China, and there are a lot of issues to dwell on as regards that one. And the last issue to discuss the perspectives of Russia-NATO contacts and security risk reduction in Europe. The Baltic region and the Black Sea region seem to be the most risky ones as regards potential conflicts in border areas between Russia and NATO. It is very important to think about the Russian moratorium on placing the far middle range missiles in Europe. And I will finish by reminding that in last December 2020, a document named Recommendation on Minimizing the Risks of Military Confrontation between Russia and NATO was issued in both Russian and English. And you can find it on the website of Russia and Canada Institute Leadership Network, as well as the Academy of Sciences. So this document is a good expert contribution into the discussions on minimizing or bringing down the risks as regards to the cooperation between Russia and NATO. If you haven't seen this document, please refer to it. It was signed by a great number of outstanding diplomats and military experts from Europe, the United States, and Russia. The last thing I'd say is that I am personally thankful to Mr. Teschendorf, who's the head of Moscow office of Friedrich Ebert Foundation. I'm also grateful to Mikhail Rykhtik, the director of Institute for International Relations and World History at Lobachevsky University. I'm looking forward to working with you in future as regards issues that are extremely important for all our countries. So thank you so much for being with us. Mikhail Ivanovich, you have the floor now. Thank you, Alexey Anatolievich. Dear friends, I'd like to share good news with you. We have 42 participants from different universities across Russia and the world. That is really encouraging that this issue has brought about such great interest, sparked such great interest. Now I'm going to give the floor to the head of Moscow office, Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Pierre Teschendorf. Please, you have the floor. Thank you so much. I hope that you hear me well. Thank you so much that you invited us to take part in this conference. Our Foundation is a non-government organization. We represent the Social Democrats in Germany, and that's why we have a tradition of supporting peace and security in Europe. You can find that we have over 100 offices across the globe, and the majority is located here in Europe, because it is our duty to promote cooperation between all the countries in this region as regards security in Europe. After 2014, we've opened a new office in Vienna to spark dialogue and cooperation. So I'm really delighted to see our colleagues from Vienna here. Another important issue is Cooperative Security Initiative, which is an attempt to spark dialogue about the future, to dwell on the possible ways to cooperate. What measures should be taken to head towards a more secure and safe future, and to make a situation that is more secure and calm in Europe to obtain. We are delighted to take part in this kind of workshop, because I myself feel that in Russia, there are a lot of politicians who see security in Europe as something irrelevant, because what they see is the disintegration or their full dependence on the United States, and they believe that they act at the behest of the United States. In Europe, we also understand that things are changing, and we all see that the United States are looking more towards China. Of course, during Trump's presidency, we all experienced that, and we understand that the situation won't change so much with Joe Biden in office, because America is going to concentrate on China. So it seems that we are also so consumed with ourselves that we don't look to the east. So I believe that today it's the time when the structure of security in Europe is going to change, and it is important that we look each other in the eye, that we discuss what views are discussed, so that we can find the ways to cooperate that would enable us to create robust architecture and trust and confidence in Europe to ensure security. This is the spirit that we'd like to stick to during this workshop, and for me, it's a great pleasure to take part. Thanks again to our partners from the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Lobachevsky University for organizing this event and for giving us a chance to take part. And we're looking to fruitful partnership. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. We really hope that we'd be able to implement our initial project as it was designed from the start. Dear friends, now I am ready to open the discussion. Dear speakers, please stick to 10 minutes time limit so that we have time for the Q&A session. After your time is passed, I'll ask you to round up your intervention so that all the participants have a say, and those who are planning to share their ideas during discussion also have this opportunity. So now I think we can proceed with the first part. I'm going to introduce the speakers from the first part of the discussion, and the second one will be led by Alexey Gromyko. Dear friends, our first speaker is the head of European Security Department at Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Dmitry Danilov. Please, you have the floor. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm delighted to see all of you. Unfortunately, we couldn't meet in person, but well, let's hope for the best, as we are going to be optimistic, maybe even in our talks. Even though there are some silver linings, so there is a certain hope, the overall trend has been to increasing tension as regards European security. We can find that there's been the imbalance in the European security architecture. The documents and events that were held in the wake of this workshop or been held recently, especially as regards the participation of Joe Biden, all of that forces us to think about not the opportunities that could have opened when the partners of the United States in Europe could engage. Let's think about the way the United States politics is going to change and whether the new ways for a new transatlantic balance will be found. I would be willing to speak about the recent NATO summit, but our agenda is rather broad. I'm going to make a couple of observations as regards that and proceed with the rest. As regards the documents that were mentioned, there is one more I can add. Is the strategy of the national security of the Russian Federation that's been just published on the 3rd of July. This document is quite interesting. It should be studied carefully. But what we can say already as regards this document, the continuity in the Russian foreign policy is being underlined. Russia is going to protect its territorial integrity, and we can say that that will be one of the main tenets of the Russian security politics and the Russian foreign policy. It seems that today it is too early to speak about the possibility of global compromise. That is an important conclusion that we should draw. We used to speak about this new windows of opportunity, of compromise. We used to speak about a possibility for the relaunch in relations between Russia and the United States. Today, it seems obvious that it will be very hard to overcome the division lines that are tied to values, and the difference is in values as regards Russia and the transatlantic region. This kind of thesis can be made not simply based on the Russian foreign discourse, but it can also be found as regards the new conceptual tenets of the West. What does that mean? If you take a look at the documents of the European Union and NATO, the recent ones, you'll find that there is the great divide in values and there is a threat posed to common Euro-Atlantic values by those challenges that are brought about by those countries who threaten the liberal and democratic world order as regards the preservation of humanitarian values and international law. So we used to discuss whether the new Cold War was possible. No, of course, today it's no Cold War. We can say that the ideological component is not there. It used not to be there, but it seems to be emerging as regards the recent documents. Here I would list the European Union Council decisions and the documents adopted together with Joe Biden, not only the communique adopted by NATO, but as well the roadmap that was adopted together by Biden and Johnson. 80 years past 1941. This is the roadmap where we can see this ideological watershed. To me, it seems that today's world for our Western partners, let's call them partners because I myself do support the idea of promoting the idea of common European space. So for our Euro-Atlantic partners, the main threat is posed as regards the NATO communique by the aggressive actions of Russia. The term threat has taken place of the former words such as assertive actions. So now it's an attack, a threat. So this is the word that is used in the NATO communique. And it's been done when the agenda for NATO for up to 2030 has been adopted. Then China. It's the next issue. Definitely, China is seen as a serious threat. But here, not everything is so simple. In 2019, when China was made part of the political dialogue within NATO, so back then, this threat was perceived not only negatively, but possibly in a positive way. Today, we can see that there is a talk of positive engagement. And yet the threat is posed, and here I am not going to cite any specific documents. So the threat is posed by the growing influence of China. That is particularly interesting. This growing influence of China as a nation that poses a threat to the world order based on values, the world order that is supported by the Euro-Atlantic bloc. So it seems that the perception of the Chinese threat has become more stringent and more severe. I think there was a following characteristic made officially. We are sure that there are a lot of countries in NATO who do not want to be the enemies of China. That was a kind of warning. But now that is going to be read very differently by the Chinese. China is now going to be very well sure of where the politics is heading. You have 2 minutes. All right, so let me make a couple more observations. I've always said, and I would like to underline, that Trump's legacy has stayed with us. Trump has created a wonderful toolbox in NATO. This is the toolbox to influence the European partners that Biden is going to use. And that was something that the NATO summit has testified to, because all the agenda of this summit has shown that it has been put together in view of this new strategic agenda of the United States. So here we are speaking about China, as well as the outer space and the climate change, where there's been a very elegant move by President Trump, who's shown a very interesting stance as regards climate change. And now we find climate change within the military agenda of NATO. That seems strange. Does NATO have a role to play here? Well, yes, because NATO is going to conduct its exercises based on this new climate agenda. What does that mean? It means that in NATO, there is no new policy in the Arctic, but it is going to broaden its scope of action.
And NATO is becoming a global instrument. In recent documents, you can clearly see that. They created a sphere which will accommodate all various directions, functional and geographical, including partnership strengthening with global partners and other players. And it's clear who is going to decide on the priorities in those partnerships. In this context, one could say with confidence that the dual approach, deterrence plus dialogue, this approach is gone. They are still talking about it, but the opportunities are no longer there. We see more and more lines of divide. And we also see that there is a stronger need to cooperate to reduce military threat, but the opportunities are getting smaller because there are smaller venues to use for that purpose. Thank you very much, Mr. Danilov. It was very interesting for me to listen to your comments regarding Donald Trump. Surprisingly, Russian mass media has welcomed the first appearance of Donald Trump in American media, which has taken place the other day. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that you should write down your questions and post them in the chat. Let me know if you have questions, and we are going to make time during the 2.5 hours that we have so that presenters can respond to the questions that come in. I think that will be easier to do it this way. Now I am going to pass the floor to Simon Weiß, senior researcher at Friedrich Ebert Foundation on peace and cooperation in Europe, Vienna. I can see you and I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much, colleagues. I have been invited to talk about strategic autonomy and possible changes in this process after Brexit. I'm going to try to do it within 10 minutes or less. I don't want to go into the origin of this idea. If you look at the main documents at the strategy of 2016 or another document that was published 3 years before that, that's when this concept of strategic autonomy first appeared. It was put together in a different sense, based on a different understanding of security, which was a part of the general policy for defense and security between 2013 and 2016. Since that time, we have seen very profound transformation of this whole idea. Look at the documents, official documents coming from Brussels in the last 2 or 3 years after 2015. The document on the EU priorities between 19 and 24. Strategic autonomy is hidden behind a different framing. A key speech by Jean-Michel in September of 2020, Strategic Autonomy for Europe, the purpose of our generation. I can quote one passage from that keynote presentation, which really speaks about this transformation that we have witnessed over 7 or 8 years, the transformation of the strategic autonomy. We have the financial resources. Recent decision on the financial package is key to this. There's European competences. If we use them reasonably, we can make a serious impact. We have trade agreements, aid, supervision, industrial strategy, digital agenda, strategy in space, and so on and so forth. And of course, we have Euro, which has to increase its role. These are sovereign instruments which we can mobilize. You can see, ladies and gentlemen, that they start from something purely defensive, from the idea of security and defense, and it all goes into a bunch of capabilities, ambitions that are not about autonomy from some subject, from the United States or from NATO, which may have been the point in the early days. This is a different concept, which looks differently. It's about strong Europe in today's world. They are learning the language of the power, as Joseph Borrell said, or his predecessor. They both talked about it. They said that they have to learn to act from the position of strength like Russia or China do. We see that the strong parties in the EU are accumulating their potential. But this is not about the strategic autonomy in the way it was understood earlier. This is the picture that we are looking at today. This is my impression that the doctrine of autonomy is evaporating. Things are different in different countries. There are different attitudes in different parties. The ambitions that different parties in Europe have are quite different. If we could talk about strategic autonomy today, this idea is loaded with a lot of different tasks and goals. I could give an example. You probably know that after 9th of May, they launched a conference on the future of Europe. All the EU member countries hold events in preparation for that. They have discussions talking about various civil forums. It is kind of a bottom-up approach. The whole process has to support the idea of united Europe. The idea of strategic autonomy is no longer there. They may still use the term, but then they explain it by saying that they need strategic autonomy to fight coronavirus, migration challenge, or other things like that, which reminds me of what Mr. Mikhail said about a stronger Europe in the world or resilient Europe. That seems to be the purpose now. The narrow definition which we had in 2013 is now diluted, and we see a lot of contradictory statements. There's a lot of talk about resilience and strategic stance. We in Vienna have been paying a lot of attention to these developments. We had a project that was about security based on collaboration. We have also done some surveys, security radar. This is not just a survey per se. This is a big piece of scientific research. We analyze the situation. We host expert debates in different countries. This year, we have 14 countries, Great Britain, United States, Armenia, Serbia. They are not all the EU members, plus Germany, France, Austria, Latvia. We are based in Austria. Why I'm telling you this? We tried to have a good quality survey that would be representative. We asked questions about strategic autonomy. We are going to have a general poll later in September of this year. The C14 expert discussions have already been completed, and now we are reviewing this process, taking stock of what we have collected. It may be interesting for you too. Some takeaways that we've got from looking into these matters. We see that the EU is not united on this matter, and everybody knows that. Countries are divided very strongly. We could feel that very clearly. I have already told you that the EU does not have such strong ambitions, but the difference between Latvia and Poland and Germany and France is tremendous. In Poland, they said that strategic autonomy was dead, and one should not touch it any longer. Germany, from the very beginning, played the role of a judge. German politicians tried to understand the attitude of the Eastern neighbors. They tried to understand what France is after, and France was one of the main engines. So Germany is trying to soften things down. And that is true for its own ambitions and for the ambitions of other parties. One of the key things, one of the key results of this process, things that we have seen in those debates in different countries, was that after Trump's presidency, the emancipation trigger was no longer there. Trump changed many things. So the EU ambitions, German ambitions, French ambitions, Germany and France being the strongest supporters of this process, have become much smaller and much softer. They're switching from hard security to soft security domain. In the questionnaire, we had a number of questions about population. We invited people to answer several questions. We offered the following options. The EU should strengthen its security. The EU should continue collaboration with NATO. The EU should become more independent from NATO, and the EU should follow the policy of security that would be fully independent, which at some point in time was the idea. We just wanted to see what people think in Europe about these matters, where the majority of the population is. Let me say a few words about the impact of Brexit on European security architecture. Mr. Gromyko mentioned the integrated review, and what we see there is that big countries are going to focus on bilateral relations. That is something that they have been doing recently, and they will continue to do that. We see some projects in France and in Germany, some things in the field of security and defense. Those all are bilateral things. There will be strengthening of special relations with the United States. You all know about it. President Biden confirmed this line when he came to Europe. Then there are other initiatives where Great Britain participates along with Norway. There won't be any big news in this field. I realize that my time is up. I want to say this. What was NATO's response to this strategic autonomy? They have published a report that says that the EU efforts towards strategic autonomy should be in line with NATO's cohesion, and everything should be based on common vision of the situation. That is just the big picture without going into any details. We all realize that this strategic autonomy is not something that NATO is happy about. Now, the bottom line, in just a couple of lines, what those debates have shown is that there are critical frictions between the EU member countries regarding the future security policy in the Union. We see this new situation with a lot more meaning than just continuous debates and conversations. From all this, we see new outcomes. We see the new strategic compass. If you ask me if I think that strategic compass is a good thing, generally, I don't think so. I think we in the European Union would be much better off if we focused on identifying common interests rather than identifying common threats, which seems to be the objective of this strategic compass thing. But that is a different subject, and I will stop at this point. Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to remind you that we are ready to take questions. If you want to ask a question, please let us know. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Professor of St. Petersburg State University, Professor of Nizhny Novgorod University, Alexander Sergunin. I saw you online. Thank you very much. Mr. Rykhtik, in my talk, I would like to talk about a different aspect of European security architecture. That is the role of Eastern Partnership in this process. This is a different angle, unusual angle. Usually the Eastern Partnership program is associated with trade relations, democratic reforms in partner countries. It's all about development of civil society organizations, gender equality, parliamentary relations, cultural relations, border relations, and other things that do not have direct link to security matters. It's not about NATO expansion. It's not about deployment of troops close to the Russian border. It's not about military exercises. Usually people would think that the Eastern Partnership is focused on soft security. Things like countering organized crime, including transnational crime, fighting illegal immigration. The European Union has been offering a lot of support to various organizations that were designed to respond to natural disasters. They did a lot to find epidemics. This was a part of the program long before the arrival of COVID-19 pandemic. The usual set of items that raised no concern at neighbor states, especially in Russia. But now things are changing. I will explain what I mean. We see that most pessimistic vision of some Russian experts and international experts are coming true. That is that there is a hidden agenda in the Eastern Partnership people started to believe that the Eastern Partnership was not designed to be a collaboration platform, but another geopolitical project that was to push Russia out of 6 post-Soviet countries. The Eastern Partnership program was supposed to become one of the alternatives to the Customs Union and Eurasian Economic Union and CIS, along with other organizations where Russia is a member. That created grounds for conflicts. That created negative consequences for security in Europe. We realized that for Ukrainian opposition at the end of 2015 to act openly, they needed a trigger when President Yanukovych refused to sign a document at the Summit of Eastern Partnership. That was the refusal to sign an association agreement, which he was expected to do. And that triggered series of events. And we know where the situation developed. This step is viewed as the main step towards his fall. However, there are much more serious reasons behind that. And we see the role of the Eastern Partnership in this process. We realize that all countries, with the exception of Belarus, are involved in different conflicts. Some are frozen conflicts, some are active, like in Nagorno-Karabakh. The situation in Belarus is also quite difficult and dramatic. One way or another, Russia is involved in all those conflicts and all those events, whatever their nature is, national or international. Russia is one of the architects of European security, and it is becoming a part of those dramatic processes, and that creates a negative impact on European security. Excuse me. From the very beginning, the Eastern Partnership program had certain parts that had to do with hard security. The European Union planned to use the Eastern Partnership program to settle some frozen conflicts. And that gave birth to a number of projects that included bringing peacekeepers from the European Union into the region. It didn't work out, but we know that such plans existed. What are we looking at now, where the situation has taken us to? I can tell you that we are witnessing a much stronger focus on security matters in the Eastern Partnership program. The European Union is quite active in this direction. We know of the European Commission document, the Eastern Partnership policy beyond 2020. This document has identified 5 strategic goals regarding the Eastern Partnership that covers the period through 2030. The second priority there was the improvement of institutions and the rule of law, and it also talks about matters of security. In May of 2020, just a few months later, another document came out from the European Union, which has provided explanations on matters of collaboration in the field of security. Along with the matters that I have already described, like fighting organized crime, civil defense, and struggling infections, which has become a very relevant, a very important and pressing matter against the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic. It also deals with cybersecurity. It looks into common struggle against terror. And what concerns me is that there is some language that deals with common EU strategy in the field of defense and security. That includes partners' participation in joint missions and operations. That means direct involvement of the country's military in various operations in the field of hard security. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Just one more important point. We've been talking about various documents, about papers. Now let's look at action. What the EU has done and what the EU partners have done. Let's look at the Eastern Partnership calendar. You can see that this year alone includes meetings in Brussels on Eastern Partnership collaboration and common EU policy for defense and security. They had the first session in April, and they're planning the second one in November. These events are not transparent. We do not know what the agenda is going to be. And the final point is also very concerning, some practical actions that were initiated by 3 countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. They have got together on May the 17th of this year, and they made a decision to approach Joseph Borrell and ask him for closer collaboration in the field of security in the context of countering Russian threat.
Later on, they were received by Joseph Borrell, and according to the reaction of the foreign ministers, Borrell's promised something to them. It seems that there's been the divide in the Eastern Partnership program, those who support it and those who want to make swifter decisions as regards trade and economic cooperation, or the elevation of the visa regime, as well as security. So that format is not transparent at all. Here we have a lot of questions. It seems that the Eastern Partnership program has a negative impact. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexander Anatolievich. Dear friends, now I am happy to give my rights of the moderator to the director of the Institute of Europe, the Russian Academy of Sciences, the president of the FES-Russia, Alexey Gromyko. Please join us. We are ready to continue our workshop. Following the program, I would like to give the floor to Sergei Krivev, Associate Professor of the Institute for International Relations and World History at Lobachevsky University. Please, you have your 10 minutes. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I would like to speak a bit about Brexit or post-Brexit. So what is the United Kingdom of the post-Brexit era between the red lines of Putin and Biden? Just recently, our president has demarcated the red lines during his address to the Federal Assembly. What does the red line mean? It means that it's a signs what is accessible and what is acceptable and what is not. And that is important so that the experts can come to terms. It seems that the conflict has turned into a manageable stage. It seems rather strange when we see the events that took place on the 23rd of June as regards the Defender vessel. From the point of view of maritime law as regards the articles of the Maritime Convention, there is the right of passage. As you know, it allows to cross territorial waters of a certain country as when a certain procedure is followed. This part of the Russian waters was closed off because of the exercises held there. So if we keep silent as regards whose Crimea is, who it belongs to, this issue has been once again brought on the top of the agenda because there is this difference between the de jure and de facto approaches. So the Russian counterparts closed off its maritime borders to the Brits. So why the British government decided to take such a risky step? They wanted to test what are the red lines of Vladimir Putin as regards this very sensitive issue of the status of Crimea, as well as the red lines of Joe Biden, because there seems to be a number of very sensitive issues in relations between Russia and the United States that were bordered with these red lines. I would risk to assume that for the British counterparts, the American reaction and response was more important because it could define the role of Great Britain in geopolitics. Recently, the US administration has shifted its priorities as regards the continent, Germany and the Nord Stream, cooperation with France in some sensitive areas, such as the Sahel region and the French Africa. Here, one more issue should be emphasized. Brexit is often compared to events in other countries. Will some European country follow suit of Great Britain? Well, it is a unique situation. It is not tied to Euroscepticism or the critique of the European Union. It has something to do with the political elite of Great Britain and its place in the world. It seems to be the result of the search of the possible subjectivity of Great Britain in geopolitics. Of course, there are such issues in other countries, and yet it seems to be rather different. The international subjectivity of other countries is closely tied with the European Union, because it is the European Union who ensures their agency and subjectivity. Whereas for Great Britain, the situation is different. This complex review that was adopted this year, as well as the new military doctrine, was assessed by the experts as the most remarkable reassessment of the role of Great Britain in the post-World War II or Cold War, post-Cold War world. This unprecedented increase in military spending from 40 billion to 47.6 billion sterling pounds. There will be about 2.3% of the British GDP spent on the military and defense. one of the main threats to Euro-Atlantic security is Russia. As regards the global context, it is posed by China. What is new here is that the focus has shifted to the Indo-Pacific region. That is something that has never been present in the military and foreign policy doctrine of Great Britain. As regards the choice of partners in Europe, these are particular countries. Of course, this new conception's been criticized. It means that there is a lack of cooperation with the EU. If we are attentive when we speak about this new doctrine, we can see that Great Britain chooses to cooperate with separate states instead of the EU as a whole. There are joint expeditionary forces that include the Baltic states, as well as the Scandinavian states and the Netherlands. The cooperation with France has been underlined. However, the EU and its defense architecture has not been mentioned. The same thing goes for the Indo-Pacific region. The Five Powers Defense Agreement is also to play a role here. Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, as well as Japan and other countries are part to this instrument. And we can see that a lot of these countries are likely to play an important role in deterring China as regards the Pacific region, especially the South China Sea. Sergey, you have 1 minute left. Okay, I'm going to round up and draw conclusions. I will risk to make the following assumption. Brexit is going to play an important role in boosting the role of Great Britain, especially as regards the sanctions politics. A lot of warnings being made as regards the possibility for deployment of the military potential, because of course, as regards this Skripal's case, Great Britain couldn't introduce sanctions against Russia being part of the EU. The EU hasn't been very active. So we can see that Great Britain had to work with Trump's administration. So here we can see that regardless of certain skeptical assessments, the role of Great Britain in the European security architecture is going to grow because it regards the cooperation with separate players and asserting Great Britain in Europe as regards the Baltic region, the Black Sea region, and probably as regards the sanction responses to the actions of Russia and Belarus. Thank you. Sergey, thank you very much. You've made a very interesting contribution. As always, a lot of food for thought. You've said and shared some information that not everybody knows as regards the peaceful passage or innocent passage. The British military vessel could not be granted an innocent passage. Can you imagine if the Russian military vessels would enter NATO area demanding innocent passage? I would think that would be a real scandal. So I believe you're right. All of these excuses do not work, and Great Britain has put Russia and NATO on the verge of a military confrontation, the same way as it was done in 2015 because of the actions of Turkey on the border between Turkey and Syria. Thank you. Now I'm going to give the floor to Zachary Paikin, the researcher in EU Foreign Policy Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, as well as the non-resident research fellow with the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy in Toronto. Zachary, please, you have the floor. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Good morning from Canada, Toronto. Thank you so much to the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Association of European Studies, as well as the Institute of Europe for the invitation. I am delighted to cooperate with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and I'm glad to see my colleague Simon Weiß. I've also been among the authors of the publication on cooperation in the area of security that Simon Weiß has cited. Dear colleagues, I'm terribly sorry, but I am going to make my presentation in English.
Remarks on the concept of strategic autonomy on the part of the European Union, and to keep my remarks, if possible, at the conceptual level, and just to make a few key points. I think that this can help to enlighten, to a certain extent, the extent to which this is developing or stagnating at the present time. The definition of strategic autonomy, I think, is important to dwell upon, because the term is often used in Brussels most often to refer to the need to act alone if and when necessary, right? To develop the capacity effectively to act alone on the part of the European Union if and when necessary. And if you want to talk about that, then you can point to a number of EU level competencies that can show that this is something that's, in progress or on the move. And so, you could look in the realm of trade, you can look in the level of defense cooperation, et cetera, and point to instruments, because everything's always about instruments in Brussels. But if you want to go beyond that, if we're talking about actorness, if strategic autonomy is about actorness, the European Union being an actor, an autonomous actor in the current great power competition with a form of strategic consciousness of its own that's possible to define and delineate, then I think that the European Union is still left wanting at this point in time. So let's just illustrate this to a certain extent with today's big issue. Let's talk about the situation with China and the deteriorating great power relationship surrounding China. Unlike the United States and the approach that the US has taken towards China, the European Union has attempted to find some sort of middle ground, if you will, to prioritize the continuation of economic integration and economic deepening of links between the European Union and China, of course, according to European norms and standards, but nonetheless to proceed along those lines, while allowing simultaneously for forms of political or geopolitical competition or criticism. And so the question is, does that work? Is that an actual example of strategic autonomy of the European Union in action? And my view is that if you look at the long term, the answer is perhaps yes, but only perhaps, because there's only so much that we can predict over the long term. Simply because this will allow for perhaps for the development of a more deeply integrated Eurasian geoeconomic and geopolitical sphere. But over the short term or the medium term, which is what we're talking about right now, in the emerging great power competition which is happening right now, then political criticism on the part of the European Union is very capable, as we've seen, of blowing up the relationship with China, and finding that equilibrium between economic integration and political criticism has proven very difficult, given the security perceptions that China's engaging in right now or experiencing right now. That's been a difficult equilibrium for them to hold. So there's no surprise, as far as I see, that following the agreement between the two sides on the the comprehensive agreement on investment that was signed shortly before the inauguration of the Biden administration, which China sort of viewed as splitting the transatlantic alliance and the EU refusing to choose sides, et cetera. I think that it's no accident that China would react in a very vicious way following, the European decision to impose sanctions on China immediately after this. And so there's a direct line, I think, that can be drawn, between this attempt that the European Union had to find this equilibrium, this autonomy in its foreign policy on the big foreign policy question of the day, and then immediately from that, losing that equilibrium and seeing China for the first time mentioned 10 times in the NATO Summit outcome document from Brussels just last month. So that's not an accident, I think. So I find this very interesting for one reason, because the competition with China is something that should theoretically play to European strengths, right? Because it's about economics and trade and geoeconomics and technology as well. And these are all areas in which the European Union is better suited to address the China challenge than NATO necessarily should be. It plays to EU strengths, but the big issue here, I suppose, or one of the major issues, I suppose, in this situation here, is that because the relationship between the European Union and Russia remains an unsolved and even worsening issue, this is actually undermining the European Union's ability to achieve strategic autonomy on a wider geographic scale vis-a-vis China. For example, you're seeing instances in which European Union members are signing up to either engage in certain measures vis-a-vis China, or even engage in the forward deployment out of region of their own militaries vis-a-vis China, with the hope that this will persuade the United States to remain invested in European security, in some sort of a trade-off like this. Now, you could call that a strategy because it implies, strategic choices and priorities. So ranking those priorities is obviously a strategy of sorts. But it's not a cohesive strategy, nonetheless. It's not a coherent position, I should say. It's simply, not agreeing on sort of the major issues that need to be agreed upon to put together a cohesive European position on foreign policy issues writ large, and engaging in some sort of a trade-off to retain, to maintain effectively the status quo within Europe that has plagued the European Union's ability to act on its own when necessary. So, at least for today, I don't know about the long term. The long term is very difficult to predict. And it may be that the European Union's attempt at balancing between these different economic and political dynamics can work over the long term. But, for now, it is clearly unable on its own to provide a significant element of autonomy on the part of the European Union in major strategic global issues that are playing out right now. So sort of to sum everything up here, right? You've got continued dependence on the United States in many respects. You've got different security priorities vis-a-vis Russia and historical memories vis-a-vis Russia among member states of the European Union. And that inherently leads, as a result, to a foreign policy rooted in the lowest common denominator that goes beyond issues related to Russia, but related to China as well. And so since you have an EU-27 foreign policy that is rooted in the lowest common denominator, by definition, that will not be a substantive foreign policy, especially as it relates to Russia. And the result of that is that you will see the perpetuation of the normative conflict, or the identity-based conflict, or the ideational conflict between the European Union and Russia. That is an inevitable conclusion, I think, from current trends. And what's interesting is that, unlike for the past several years, where we've seen, a very rapid descent in the U.S.-Russia relationship towards, outright rivalry, whereas the EU-Russia relationship has been a little bit more, stagnant and geared more towards political alienation more than anything else. I think we're seeing something go. We're seeing the roles reverse here to a certain extent, right? The U.S. is able to make coherent strategic decisions, and the U.S. decision has been to try, no guarantee that they'll succeed, but to try to stabilize the relationship with Russia in order to make room for a pivot towards confronting China. Whereas the European Union remains stuck in the same normative, zero-sum rut of a foreign policy that it cannot escape from, which in turn is leading to, the continuation, effectively, of a rivalry with Russia that is causing, the relationship to at best perhaps plateau at a suboptimal level. But as Mr. Borrell said in his recent report, presented the joint communique that was presented on his part and the part of the European Commission recently to the European Council, that he predicts that it's entirely likely that the relationship with Russia will worsen, in the coming months and years as well. So this raises some interesting questions, I think, for the future shape of this emerging pan-Eurasian security and economic order, right? If on the one hand, you may or may not see the EU-China relationship plateau, along the lines of some sort of stable rivalry, even as the EU-Russia relationship at that point, continues to deteriorate. If those two things are happening at the same time, that raises some very interesting questions, I think, about the European Union's place in this emerging Eurasian system over the long run, and whether it'll be a central actor or a peripheral actor effectively in that system. But while the long-term future, I suppose, is towards this integrating Eurasian or pan-Eurasian system, I can't help but avoid the conclusion that over the coming years or over the coming decade, we're looking at the Pacific decade, rather than the Eurasian decade. Under that implies that the U.S.-China dynamic is going to be, first and foremost at the head of discussions. And if the dynamic in U.S.-China relations is towards a continued deterioration of that relationship, then regardless of the balancing act that the EU tries to reach to find some sort of stable confrontation with China that mixes economic integration with political confrontation, the EU may nonetheless be forced to pick sides if the relationship between the US and China continues to get worse. So the implication or the final conclusion of this, I think, is that the European Union strategic autonomy as a topic retains a strong regional component. We always talk about the European Union's global strategy and the need to be a pole, even to a certain extent, in the multipolar world at the global level. But nonetheless, if the European Union is unable to resolve certain fundamental regional questions related to Russia, related to the Eastern Mediterranean, et cetera, then there will be some significant obstacles, I think, to the European Union expressing itself and advancing its interests on a wider strategic and geographic plane. Beyond that. So basically, for those who argue that you can ignore Russia, that you can ignore the problems in the relationship with Russia and focus exclusively on China for the time being, I think that ignores just the interconnected nature of the Russia-China strategic partnership, the growing interconnectedness of the Eurasian theater, and obviously all of this raises interesting questions for the future of Euro-Atlantic security, if indeed European strategic autonomy is going to be primarily expressed at the regional level over the coming decade, rather than on a pan-Eurasian or on a global level. Thanks very much for your time. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Zachary, thank you so much. There is a lot of food for thought. I would urge our audience to raise their hands or to ask their questions in our chat. We've already heard 5 speakers. All of their talks were quite interesting. We are so used to having a heated debate in the chat, but now I haven't seen any questions raised or comments. So I'd urge our audience to become more active. Zachary, thank you so much. You've mentioned the least common denominator of the politics of the 27. We've been discussing the issue of introducing qualified majority as regards the voting procedure, and I really hope that if this decision is taken, there is a possibility to break the deadlock. As for Russia, there are certain pluses and minuses, and we know that a lot of attention is paid to this issue and the follow-up of discussions in the EU. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to Elena Ananieva, the head of the UK Studies Centre in the Institute of Europe. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to speak about Great Britain and politics after Brexit. And I would like to also support Zachary, Paikin and Alexander Sergunin as regards what they've said. So I'm going to speak about the long-term trends as regards Great Britain and its internal politics. As regards domestic politics, relations with Russia have become more acrimonious after 2016. The struggle between Brexiters and those who, the Remainers, that has turned into mutual accusations as regards the ties with Russia. If we recall the parliamentary committee report, and it was supported by Boris Johnson in 2020, right before the parliamentary vacation season. Why? Because this report was put together by the Remainer party. It was utterly anti-Russian. It hasn't spared anyone, neither diplomats nor academics. And it played a great role in the internal struggle. As regards the integrated overview, it was put together as regards the national security strategy of Great Britain. It seems that Great Britain, even though there is the 17% budget deficit and the debt accumulated by the government is also quite vast, yet the military budget and spending is going to be the largest among the EU members and among the NATO members. Of course, initially, Great Britain wanted to claim the freedom of trade, and that was precisely what it wanted to tackle while it was within the EU. But now we see that Great Britain doesn't want to withdraw from Europe. Look, while it was within the EU, it wanted to enlarge the EU. Why? Because Great Britain believed that expansion of the EU would stop the deepening of the integration. It would prevent political integration that it didn't like at all.
Great Britain always wanted to play against a coalition that could oppose Britain. And that creates a twofold situation. Unite and rule on the one hand, so that the EU would accept countries that are not very fit to be members, and divide and rule, which means that there will be a split in the European Union that would also be caused by the split with Russia. So I think Britain will try to make sure that everybody fights everybody. It has bilateral relations, and it focuses on bilateral relations with many countries, and we talked about the expeditionary force, but it really wants to spread quarrels in the EU. I have no illusions at all. As of Russia, Great Britain relations, they have become so confused that it would take a very long time to really straighten things out. Great Britain will strengthen its positions in NATO. Look at the recent events that have taken place in June. The new Atlantic Charter with President Biden has included international order. And they have introduced a new logic based on rules. They have the following language there. Key principles such as principles of freedom of navigation and promotion of international use of the seas. I think we are going to see more provocations. Mr. Gromyko offered us an idea of a Russian ship going into territorial waters of NATO countries. What if a Russian ship goes into the waters around the Falkland Islands? And who cares whether these islands are recognized as British territory or not? That's one point. Secondly, I don't think that Britain has put Biden's red lines to test. Mr. Putin said that there was an American reconnaissance plane in the air at the time of that passage of the British destroyer through the waters near the Crimea. After the new Atlantic Charter, we saw the G7 summit, which hosted most of the heads of the EU states. Then there was an agreement that the United States would participate in the mobility project. Then there's the EU summit, where the new EU members speak against the summit with President Putin. They wanted to have a summit for democracy. Americans have been talking for quite some time about building an alliance of democratic countries. We see that there is a very acute situation in many different areas, and I would say that British forces would make their contribution to the deterioration of the situation. Thank you very much, Yelena. Falkland Islands are very far away. They could enter the territorial waters near Gibraltar. That brings Spain into equation. Yes, indeed, that is also a possibility. They do not recognize Gibraltar as a foreign territory. So we could part with Spain and see how Great Britain feels about its red lines being violated. If we follow that logic, we can go really far. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Anna Doleva-Klepachka, the professor at Institute of European Law at the University of Bialystok. Anna, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this event. It's sad that we could not have it in a face-to-face format and have a good conversation. On the other hand, I'm very happy that we have information technologies that give us a chance to speak even in such circumstances. I wanted to say that citizens of third countries like Russian Federation have to get a visa before they enter the European Union. Schengen visas are most popular, and it offers people an opportunity to travel around the Schengen area. But there are some exceptions. In today's talk, I want to focus on those exceptions, on the possibilities for Schengen area countries to establish temporary border control. The rule says that internal borders can be crossed at any point without border control, regardless of the citizenship of the travelers. But in some situations, exceptions may be made. I want to stress the fact that restoration of border control is up to a EU country. The European Commission may make a statement about the need of this measure and can evaluate the level of necessity, but it cannot reject this measure. There are three grounds for a temporary restoration of border control within Schengen zone. If there is a serious threat to domestic security or international policy, emergency situations like large sporting events, climate summit, or different types of political events. There are Articles 25 and 26 of Code on Borders. There is a second provision when there is a direct threat that necessitates immediate actions. That's Article 28 of the Border Code. And third situation is where there is a threat to the functioning of the Schengen zone if there is serious deterioration of relations at the borders. The first two cases deal with specific situations in the Schengen zone member states. In the first case, a member country that plans to establish border control, according to Article 27 of the Border Code, has to inform other countries about its intention. Such notification usually would be made at least 4 weeks before a border control is established. The second option, when there is a threat to state policy or domestic security which necessitates immediate action, there is a special procedure. The EU member country can restore border control at its internal borders for the period up to 10 days. If such threat persists, the state can make a decision to extend the use of border control, but no more than for 20 days. The third option of temporary restoration of border control addresses situations that are described in Article 29 of the Border Code. That is exceptional circumstances, a threat to the functioning of Schengen zone as a result of serious deficiencies at the external borders. If you look at the practices in the first half of 2021, European Commission has received 300 notifications about restoration of internal border control by the member states. According to Articles 25 and 28 of the Border Code, 168 situations that had to do with coronavirus pandemic. 91 situation was linked to threats of terrorism and high migration pressure, and the remaining 41 cases had to do with different events, political summits, climate summits, and sporting events. If you look at the time periods when this was done, you can see clear state trends. Before the migration crisis of 2015, most of the notifications on restoration of internal border control. That is 29 out of 36 such notifications between 2006 and the first half of 2014 had to do with exceptional events. Only 7 situations out of 36 had to do with risks of terror attacks. In the next period, second half of 2015 and all the way to the beginning of 2020, temporary restoration of internal border control was linked to unprecedented inflow of migrants. 72 out of 85 situations. Only 13 notifications were justified by various international events like NATO summits, political summits, and other such events. And the third period, after the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in Europe, countries fought coronavirus, and they have introduced international traffic. Many of them closed borders for some periods. Out of 177 notifications on border closure, 168 were linked to coronavirus infection. Other 9 cases had to do with the threats of terrorism and transition of large masses of people. We can see that the border code in the Schengen zone and the possibility of border control restoration by member states make good sense because they describe various emergency situations. However, after the migration crisis of 2015 and later during the pandemic, many countries acted in a way that was not in line with the initial idea and principle of proportionality of such border control. It necessitates a reform of this system that should decrease the possibilities for restoration of internal border control. That seems to be making very good sense. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for touching upon this important matter that the Institute of Europe has been working on for quite some time in a very profound way. We have Vadim Dvornikov with us today, and of course, Olga Yurievna Potemkina is also very interested in these matters. Many things you said are of great interest to experts. Thank you very much for that. And next, I'm going to pass the floor to Rustem Shamilovich Davlet-Gildeev. He's a professor at Kazan Federal University, a director of Scientific Educational Center for Human Rights, International Law and Integration Problems, head of the Center of Excellence in European Studies, Voices Plus. On top of all those things, I must say that Mr. Davlet-Gildeev represents the Tatarstan division of the European Studies Center. Over to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gromyko. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to be with all of you. Teleworking has become a need these days. The other day, last week, we had a session of their summer school on human rights under the aegis of the United Nations human rights. We jumped on the last wagon and we could organize this event in a hybrid mode. Some participants came to Kazan in person, although we were not sure until the very last day whether we would be able to accommodate people to participate in a face-to-face meeting or not. Today, we're here to talk about the European security architecture. I study law, and I would like to focus on some aspects of security, but they also deal with matters of migration. This is something that many of us study. That includes Olga and Vadim, and me too. I am also doing a lot of research on those matters. The European Commission is building its security architecture, and in this security architecture, there is a serious role that migration security plays. We know that last September they launched a special action plan, a pact on migration and shelter. This new pact was a new milestone because it sets a task to develop new agreements, new laws, and new plans in the field of migration in a broad sense. And it also dealt with matters of providing shelter to refugees. It also is quite relevant to functioning of the Schengen zone and border control at the external borders and the control at internal borders of member countries. This is essential to address challenges in the field of migration security that the EU is facing now. The challenges are quite huge, so this work is very important. It all is about the inflow of a large number of people who are seeking shelter in Europe. They are increasing in numbers. In 2015 and 2016, the numbers were huge. The number of migrants that arrive in the EU is still quite large. The new pact was adopted, and there is yet another document which is a framework document. There is a new strategy in the field of security. It was published in July of 2020. This strategy includes matters that have to do with migration. They aim at protection of rights, and on the other hand, they aim at creating space that would provide security to the EU. It's not only about forced migration. It also deals with irregular and illegal migration and human trafficking. The EU security strategy includes the subject of human trafficking in the context of fighting organized crime. We look at this problem as a part of irregular, illegal migration, and measures to counter this criminal activity are developed. Besides, we can see that this strategy is a reflection of something else. Illegal movement of migrants or migrants smuggling. A document was designed and it's now being discussed in the European Commission, that is the EU action plan against migrants smuggling. This document covers the period between 2021 and 2025. This document sets the direction for European institutions that deal with irregular migration. And it would be quite a significant milestone document. It is now being developed, and in Q3 of this year, it is expected to be passed. So this document, when it enters into force, it will do a lot to counter illegal traffic of migrants. It also will raise new aspects of migration and providing a sanctuary. A new concept should be developed in the EU to counter illegal movement of migrants. So that's one thing that we can clearly see. The action plan on migrant smuggling is a part of the agenda against organized crime that is inclusive of human trafficking. All of that is included in the EU security strategy. This strategy, amongst other things, covers several issues related to the Schengen zone. For example, it deals with information about travelers. There's a directive that was passed in 2016. It's a directive on use of travelers' records. This information about travelers and passengers is also included in the strategy as one of the instruments that can be used to create high level of security in the EU. It focuses on these matters. I have mentioned several lines of work. One of them is human trafficking. In April of 2021, a separate strategy was passed by the EU about fighting human trafficking. This strategy strengthens the European institutions that specialize in countering such crimes. That is described in the directive of 2011. against human trafficking, and it also is stated in the Directive on Sanctions of 2009, sanctions against employers. It's about actions against legal entities that employ illegal immigrants who fall victims to human traffickers. So this is the strategy that makes an attempt to impose more stringent measures, and it encourages all stakeholders and institutions to work harder in this direction. It encourages these organizations to work hand in hand, to collaborate with each other. There are new procedures for due diligence for various organizations at international level. You have 1 minute, Rustam. Let me tell you that within this common security strategy that is developed in the EU, we see quite a lot on the subject of migration and human trafficking, illicit movement of migrants and smuggling of migrants. This is a very important part of the European security strategy. Thank you so much. We have 2 experts that have spoken about similar matters that may be touched upon during the debates. We have several people that want to participate in the discussion, and I am now going to open the floor for you. First, I am going to pass the floor to Mieczysław Zdanovich, professor of the University of Białystok in Poland. Mieczysław, over to you.
I see that a lot of people don't have their screens on. Mieczysław, please, if you hear us, you can take the floor. Mieczysława, we don't see you. It seems that Professor Zdanovich is not with us. Mieczysława is not with us. Let's hope that she might join in. Sergei Valerievich Starkin is next on the list. Is the professor of the Institute for International Relations and World History at Lobachevsky University. Sergei Valerievich, are you with us? Sergei Starkin. So far, I can't neither hear you nor see you. All right, then. The list hasn't been exhausted yet. The next on the list is Alberto Alonso, the Associate Professor of the Russian International University, the head of Erasmus+. Will we hear Roberta? Wonderful. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. We are very glad to see you. We are ready to hear you. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, hello, everyone from Italy. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to take part in this workshop. As regards the strategic autonomy of the EU, it seems we are facing not simply stagnation, but a regress. I would cite my article here, Diplomacy According to Sergei Lavrov, that was published in one important Italian think tank on international relations. This article underscores the restoration of the high status of diplomacy and going back to its classical function of balancing the irreconcilable interests of the world's most powerful states. The EU, as the foreign minister of Russia has claimed, has turned into an ideological forum. And he claimed that even before 2014, beginning from 2014, the policies of sanctions were introduced by the EU. It's no coincidence that another article was compared to the one I wrote. It was titled, Russia is not interested in a constructive dialogue with the EU. Going back to the issue of European strategic autonomy, I believe we can speak about two factors that make the European strategy weak. First of all, the very structure of the European foreign policy, and the other one is unwillingness to engage in a dialogue with Russia. As regards the foreign politics, it becomes more and more declarative, and yet it can't be independent. The EU has acquired international agency, and still we can see that the EU hasn't managed to resolve some difficult outstanding issues as regards the European identity and the matters concerning its integration. The European foreign policy doesn't manage to comply with flexibility, coherence, and balance of interests. We can find that, and I agree here with Minister Lavrov, the situation can be characterized by the lack of multipolarity, the shift towards unilateral world order. So what kind of world order is at stake here when we are speaking about the European security and foreign politics? For Russia, this world order should be based on what has been achieved after World War II, meaning Yalta agreements. And the main safeguard as regards security of Russia hasn't been bolstered by any document. NATO's expansion to the east is a historical mistake. We can see that the guarantees given to Russia after World War II are no longer in action, and nothing has taken their place. And it seems to be a big problem for the EU itself. As for the lack of a diplomatic approach, the EU has changed the framework. It's working with Russia now. The As regards the principles, we can list that there are 5 of them that the relations with Russia are built on. The first principle means building a democratic society in Russia that should promote countering conservative propaganda. As for the declaration adopted by the European Union in this June, it means deterrence of Russia. The European Union has gone back on the idea of holding a summit with Russia that was first proposed by Germany and France. It seems that the countries that represent the majority of the population of the EU, as well as the majority of its GDP, have no say, because the decision was blocked by 6 countries, such as Poland, the Baltic states, and these countries make less than 15% of the European GDP. Their voices were enough to go back on the German initiative. From all of that, we can conclude that today, strategic autonomy of the EU is undergoing a critical stage. It risks becoming less efficient and effective as regards its foreign politics. Without the diplomatic strategy of working with Russia, with its approach towards Ukraine, we can find that the EU has made a number of mistakes as regards its security. Thank you for your attention. Roberta, Professor, thank you so much. You've said a lot of interesting things, a very interesting intervention. You said that your article has been published, so our experts can read it. It's valuable now. Thank you. You've also spoken about the Yalta-Potsdam system, whether it's become a part of the past or whether it's still relevant. I myself think that partially it's become history, and yet, as regards the United Nations, it is the part of those agreements. So if we say that Yalta agreements are no longer relevant, then we should close down the United Nations as irrelevant and useless. Yet I think that its member states don't want to close it down. The Nuremberg Tribunal was also part of the Yalta agreements. I don't think that our world will become safer if we forget about decisions taken during the Nuremberg tribunals. Our experts are very helpful as regards finding new topics for discussion. Thank you so much. Now, I am delighted to give the floor to Valery Petrovich Lubin, the senior professor of the Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He's taken part in many conferences in the Institute of Europe. And of course, that is very sad that we cannot talk personally and meet personally. And yet we are delighted to see you. Valery Petrovich, you have the floor. Excuse me, I forgot to turn the sound on. Thank you so much, the organizers. Thank you so much, Alexey. I was the senior researcher back in 1983, but that's not so important. Well, you are the leading researcher of the Russian Academy of Science and its Institute of Europe. Yes, well, I am very honored to have you with us. Thank you, the organizers. It's not the first time I'm taking part in such interesting conferences, such as the one held by the Institute in Nizhny Novgorod. Now going back to our issue, I would like to address one more aspect. I'm going to speak about people diplomacy as well as the civil society as regards cooperation between Russia and Germany. People-to-people diplomacy is an important part of soft power, and it's been part of the national security strategy of Russia. Our colleague, Mr. Danilov, has mentioned this strategy. It seems that today it is really hard to assume that there are a lot of supporters for peace today. That was the case, however, in late 20th century. Back then, the European countries managed to take an approach that could balance out relations between the Soviet Union and the Western Bloc. It seems today that civil society is the one who's able to support peace. The unification of Germany has changed the situation, and we can see that there are a lot of sister cities still between Russia and Germany. Even though there are no contacts or very few contacts between the European leaders, still there are a lot of events organized by civil society. The pandemic has changed the situation drastically, and not all such events can be held. Yet, I think all of you know the Russia-Germany Forum and other informal forums that help to support the development of friendly ties between Russia and Germany. I'm going to focus on the society that emerged in 1988, and it was supported by the veterans of World War II. This society was supported by the mayors of Köln and Volgograd, regardless of the parties they belonged to. Some years ago, I met the director of this organization, Heinz Temmermann was its head, and he was one of its founders. He was also one of the commissioners of the Communist Party of Germany. And they also helped to establish ties with the Communist Party of Italy. So these big parties were struggling for peace amidst the Cold War. their support for the European security used to be an important factor. Not so many people in Germany remember that there was an opinion in Germany that expansion of NATO was not a good idea. The new Eastern politics, as well as the Helsinki Conference in 1975, could serve as example of boosting European security. Now I'm going to say a couple of more words about Volgograd-Köln society. I've spent a couple of months in Germany recently. I, together with the members of this society, organized the celebrations of the 8th of May, the end of World War II, and the celebrations were held in Köln, nearby a monument to the Soviet soldier, the liberator. These events were held despite the pandemic. The civil organizations are the ones that testify to the fact that cooperation is possible. In Trafficking in Germany, there are a lot of celebrations held in Berlin on the 8th of May. When we speak about the 80 years since the beginning of World War II, it is important to remember how valuable cooperation between our two countries are. Europeans should remember about the losses that were suffered by the Soviet Union and peoples in Europe. My conclusion would be that we should not underestimate people-to-people democracy and diplomacy. This organization can strengthen security on the continent. Thank you for your attention. Valery Petrovich, thank you so much. You told us about the commission of Willy Brandt. Oh no, that was another thing, was the historical commission. Sorry, I think I've heard that you've also mentioned it, because you began by saying that today it is difficult to rely on public opinion when it comes to anti-military movements. Today, it's a big problem because a lot of people think about climate and environment, but just so few are worried about a dangerous situation in geopolitics. This issue is not so popular, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Valery. I'm going to check our chat. Despite me urging you to write comments and questions in our chat, it doesn't seem to be very lively. And on our screen, I don't see those who would like to intervene. Oh, I see one hand. So we have now our speakers who are going to take the floor once again. I would love to give the floor back to Simon Weiß. Please, you have the floor. Alexey, thank you very much. Since not so many were willing to talk, but I would like to respond to what Valery Lubin has said. To me, it seems a very important issue. I myself grew up in Germany. And what you've said refers to what we do here in Friedrich Ebert Foundation. I'd like to share my perspective with you. I agree that we don't see a broad popular movement in support of peace and disarmament. Why? We have been thinking about this with our colleagues in Vienna and Berlin. Back then, that movement existed in Western Germany because the society in Western Germany had a great stimulus to change the situation. The main issue there was the reunification with Eastern Germany. That's why they found the solution of coexistence, the Warsaw Pact, the coexistence with the Soviet bloc. Now, Germany doesn't have this kind of interest. Numbers are very different today as regards the nuclear threat. We know that it's a lot less than in early 80s. Speaking about the demonstrations held on the 8th of May, the 9th of May, and Berlin and Köln, those are mainly old people. We won't find many young people there. There will be only very few. So what I want to say that this dynamics and the people-to-people contacts, sisters, cities, all of that is on the fall. So to continue this politics of reconciliation would not be so easy. It is a big problem here. As for the activities undertaken by Russia, Russia has banned some organizations in Russia. Heinrich Böll organization has been marked as an unfriendly one. So that's what I'm going to say when I'm talking to our German partners. So when we are on the brink of a disaster, we always hope that civil society will help us out, but no, it won't. When I was a student at a university, I saw that there was the talk of simplifying the visa procedure for students. And I promise that it's going to remain on the level of discussions today. We can't see progress here. The generations changed and there is a lack of progress. Therefore, I'd say that it will be very hard to rely on civil society on both sides to convince political decision makers that they should cooperate more with each other. That unfortunately is very unlikely and it's not happening. I don't know myself how to change this situation, and it's a really bad, lamentable trend. Unfortunately, it's been disappearing, and I don't see anything that could give us hope for a change in near future. I'm sorry for being so pessimistic. Thank you so much. Even though there's been a touch of pessimism in what you said, yet it is justified. Your stance is understandable. And I believe that experts, being pessimists or optimists by nature, they should try to contribute to resolving difficult situations. You mentioned William Brandt and other political figures. There was a famous commission of William Brandt, and Oliver Palme commission was also inspired by it. They published a report, Common Security. This year, the group of international experts has been established. It was initiated by the Oliver Palme Foundation, and with a view to writing the Common Security Report 2022, based on the resonance that was drawn back in 1982, so that this success could be achieved once again. Thank you very much for speaking about St. Petersburg dialogue, about working groups that are still operational. Of course, we can say that civil society has its say in people-to-people diplomacy, and we should take initiatives in our hands sometime. As for the Burl Foundation, I agree with you to a certain extent. But this foundation and their leadership, I know them well. We met within the St. Petersburg dialogue frameworks, yet their political stance is quite active. This organization doesn't deal solely with environment and climate, and their stance is quite stiff as regards certain issues. They are quite unfriendly when it comes to speaking about Russian politics. Sometimes they make statements and claims that haven't been checked very well, so we can see certain ungrounded accusations there, and that prompts introducing sanctions. And of course, that is not the best trend, but I'm really happy that this anti-war issue has been touched upon. And of course, I still hope for the optimistic approach and being more active. Summit in Geneva gives us hope for the future of the talks on strategic stability. And we're really looking forward to a change in Russia-NATO relations in the future. I hope that common sense will prevail.
Я потянул еще немножко время, но на самом деле время...
I see that we have used up our time. We were planning to bring this part of the workshop to an end at 5:30. And now I am asking my co-chair, Mr. Teschendorf and Mikhail Rykhtik, if they would want to make any final remarks or statements. I think I said pretty much everything that I was planning to say. Maybe Mr. Teschendorf or Mr. Rykhtik want to say something if they're still with us. I think they are not. Evgenia, would you like to say something? Yes. I'm going to say just a few words. I am with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. Mr. Teschendorf had to go to a different meeting, so I am going to step in and say a few final words. Thank you very much for your cooperation with the Institute of Europe and other organizations, the Lobachevsky University of Nizhny Novgorod. They are always very constructive. I want to say thank you to all participants. Thank you to Simon, who joined us from Vienna. Thank you very much. Thank you. Suddenly, I have the honor of concluding this session. The other leaders are no longer with us. I would like to also say thank you to our interpreters. I think they deserve a round of applause. I also want to say thank you to Olga Yurievna Potyomkina and her team. They have worked quite hard on the side of the Institute of Europe to make this event happen. We could not get together in person. We were prepared to accommodate everyone in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, and that required a lot of effort. The work was done, and it's not going to be wasted. I hope that all participants have enjoyed the presentations, and I'm sure that none of you regret spending this time with us. I want to wish all of you the best of health wherever you are in Russia, in Germany, in Austria, where the pandemic is still active. Moscow has been hit by the new variety of the virus, and slowly Russia comes to realize that certain groups of people have to get their shots. They have to get vaccinated. University professors, school teachers, people who work at restaurants in the areas with a lot of people should not threaten others. Today, the Ministry of Education of Russia has announced the target number. 60% of all science workers have to be vaccinated by September. We'll be working towards that. I once again wish all of us to be in good health. I hope that we all have a great summer, have great opportunities to have rest and good time. I hope we will continue to live in peace and we will say no to war. Thank you. Also, thank you very much to Alexey, our technical support person who has been with us all along. Thank you. Bye-bye.